All right, good morning, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I want to welcome everybody to this morning or this afternoon session, depending on where you're at. Those of you who are here on the West Coast with me here in Seattle, it's just a little bit after 10 a.m., but we know folks are joining from all over the country. So welcome to today's session. This is part of a larger series offering mental health and suicide prevention information, support, and resources in response to the global pandemic that we're all living through. My name is Eric Bruns, and I'm a professor at the University of Washington, and I'm Associate Director of the School Mental Health Assessment Research and Training Center here in Seattle. The SMART Center, as we call it, hosts the School Mental Health Supplement to the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or Northwest MHTTC. And so the SMART Center and the Northwest MHTTC are partnering with Forefront Suicide Prevention, the Association of Washington School Principals, today's guests, or the host of today's session, Drs. Jim and Liz Mazza, who created the DBT in Schools curriculum, Northwest Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports Network, Sound Supports, and others to bring you this well-being series, which offers a variety of virtual learning opportunities for kids, families, educators focused on mental wellness and suicide prevention. So today's 60-minute session is the second of two question and answer sessions that we've had with my colleagues and our new YouTube stars, Drs. Liz Dexter Mazza and Dr. Jim Mazza. And so we're excited to have them on for this second Q&A session that goes along with their 16-session YouTube series that they have put on related to DBT in the schools. And what I'm going to do here, I don't know if I'm supposed to, let's see, should I share the results of our polling or just keep that going, Megan? I'm just going to put that up here and advance the slide, see if that works. Okay, so sorry, I'm standing in for Kelsey Schmitz, who is our coordinator of the School Mental Health Training Supplement, so I'm not as fluent at these introductions as she is. But this slide here shows the well-being series, and you can check out our website, which is listed here, and check out the other events that are planned. We've hosted most of them at this point, but if you have questions, you can reach out to our amazing program coordinator, Megan Lucy, whose email is there on the slide. So just a little bit of information about the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. The MHTTC network is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is part of our federal Department of Health and Human Services. And the MHTTC network includes 10 regional centers, as well as a American Indian and Alaska Native Center and a National Hispanic and Latino Center, as well as a network coordinating office. And we know many of you are joining outside of the Northwest, so we wanted to make sure you knew that everybody has a regional training center through SAMHSA. This next slide shows you a little bit about the Northwest MHTTC. We support the school mental health workforce in Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And this is how you can get in touch with us in various ways: our website, our newsletter link, and social media accounts, and so forth. We send out monthly newsletters that includes information on our trainings and resources, so be sure to sign up so that you'll know what we're offering and you can be in the know. So this series, Student Life Skills to Survive and Thrive During COVID-19 and Beyond, offers different ways for you to engage with the Mazzas. For several weeks, Jim and Liz have been broadcasting live from their living room as they teach their own children skills that are really necessary in life, and even more so during the current year in which we're living, the basics of emotional regulation and other specific skills. So you can tune in live on their YouTube page or watch their recorded sessions. To get those links, you can just use the DBT series link, which is at the bottom of this screen. And you can see here all of the lessons that have been held to date, which is really extraordinary. This is just a little glimmer in their eyes. It seems like just a couple days ago, but it has now been two full months and 16 sessions. So today, this is the second of their Q&A sessions related to their series and related to their DBT-based tutorials. And before we start taking questions, several of you submitted questions ahead of time. And what I'm going to do is turn it over to Jennifer Stuber, Executive Director of Forefront Suicide Prevention, who's going to further introduce Liz and Jim and also help us get those questions answered for you. So take it away, Jen.
Good morning, everyone. I want to say thank you all. I'm imagining many of you on this call today have been following Jim and Liz over the last many weeks. And I just want to take a brief moment to introduce Jim and Liz. They don't need much of an introduction, I imagine, to this group, but I guess I want to give a more personal introduction and just say that these two have been truly heroes during this period of the pandemic. They've gotten up every morning, every day of the week, and have basically become producers of their own TV show using their own lives as the subject matter. And it's been really humbling and beautiful to watch. And I feel really grateful to know you both. I think Washington and the world is very lucky to have this resource created. I also want to take a moment to thank Eric and Kelsey and Megan and the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. You guys have been incredible during this 3-month period as well. And you guys are truly all heroes, and all of you online are heroes because you're shown up here to learn more about how we can support our kids during this really, really challenging time, and ourselves. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Liz to make some introductory comments. And then, as I said, I'll be popping in intermittently to help organize the conversation throughout our morning together.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Dr. Liz Mazza.
And I'm Dr. Jim Mazza.
And we're so glad you're here with us for our second Q&A. We're so grateful to both Forefront and Suicide Prevention and the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center for hosting these live Q&As with us. It has been quite a surreal time where we have been doing daily live streams since the end of March, trying to provide support to families and parents through the DBT Steps A Students Class for Surviving and Thriving in COVID-19 and beyond, which both Jen and Eric have mentioned. And we've also 3 mornings a week do a Parenting Through COVID-19 and Beyond daily live stream as well, really helping talk to parents and educators and families about the use of the skills from the DBT Steps A curriculum. And really great to see that we have a great mix of both parents and teachers, educators on with us today. So we want to make sure we get to a lot of your questions. One of our poll questions we'd love to ask to you all is, how many of you were on our previous Q&A, or if this is your first time here? So if Megan, if you could launch that poll, that would be great for us. To give you a little bit of background, if this is your first time here with us, I am a clinical psychologist, and Jim is a school psychologist and a professor at the University of Washington. And we developed the DBT Steps A curriculum over the last 15 years now as kind of an answer for us really wanting to think about how do we take an upstream approach to not only suicide prevention, but to building mental wellness in youth by adapting dialectical behavior therapy, which is a comprehensive, effective outpatient and inpatient therapy treatment developed by Dr. Marsha Linehan at the University of Washington, taking the affective skills component of that treatment, that evidence-based treatment, and moving it upstream into a universal social-emotional learning approach in middle and high schools. And now we've been working on adapting it for elementary schools, and you've adapted it to the college population as well. So that's kind of where we came through with all of this of adapting the curriculum. Okay.
All right, nice work.
Thanks.
So I think one of the first things we just want to share is that we think that this is a difficult time for everybody involved, right? Not just for our kiddos, but also for us as parents, right? And so we've been put into new roles that we didn't think that we would ever have to do, right? That we'd become an elementary and a middle school teacher, that we'd become the lunch person for our kiddos, that we'd become the janitorial staff for midday accidents or whatever else that would be, right? And so, and what's happened in doing that is that our time that we thought was dedicated to our life as our careers and our profession is now being borrowed to do some of these other things. And we start to feel inside inefficient. We start to feel ineffective. We start to feel like we're not a good parent. We start to feel like we're not a good partner. And so this whole COVID and the Black Lives Matter, the protesting things that are happening, the systemic racism has impacted all of us. And so we want to make sure that everybody knows that the skills that we're going to be talking about aren't just for suicide prevention, although we think they'd be really key for suicide prevention. They're actually for about emotion regulation and then what to do when our emotions are getting the best of us, right? When they're driving the bus, now what do we do? Because we don't want to make big decisions when our emotions are driving the bus, because we often go off the road.
Right. And then, so I'm really glad to see that about a third of you were here for our first Q&A. 2/3 of you are not, and no worries, because this is a Q&A, one is not dependent on the other, so you're absolutely be fine getting more information. I know several people have asked, just come from the questions that they submitted beforehand, like how does this training compare to other teen mental health first aid and SOS? So maybe that's something you can start and answer.
Sure. Mental health first aid, great programs, Sources of Strength, which is in one of the SOS programs, and Signs of Suicide, which is the other SOS program, right? They're all wonderful programs, right? And many of them focus, at least SOS and A Source of Strength, focus more on that suicide piece that's there. They're wonderful programs. Sources of Strength tends to focus more on that universal level. Signs of Suicide is much more specific towards that depression and suicide piece. And it meets a couple, like 2 or 3 times during its entirety. There are films that are there and videos that you watch, and it has an assessment question that's there. So that's wonderful. What's different about DBT Steps A is that it has skill specificity that you say you can do this skill, this skill, this skill, this skill, depending on what's happening. Whereas I think that that's not the strength of Sources of Strength and Signs of Suicide, right? Mental health first aid, teen mental health first aid, great program again, where there are adults identified and trained to work with youth in the schools, and it's youth dependent. The youth that have been trained come to the adult then says, okay, thanks for that information, and let's see if we can get that individual help, right? Again, it doesn't have some of the skill specificity pieces that are there. And DBT Steps A is a curriculum that's taught to give them throughout the year, 1 day a week. If you're doing semesters, it could be 2 days a week for the semester. It gives them skills proactively, right? So we're not waiting for something to go wrong to hear about it. What we're trying to do is give them skills so nothing goes wrong, right? Or so that they don't get into the waters. And I think that that's one of the things that Forefront in the schools has been trying to do as well, is to say, hey, look, we know emotional dysregulation is really hard. And we know once you get into that river and going downstream because of emotions are getting to you, lousy things happen, right? And it's hard to get out of the water. And so we're trying to give them skills to not get in the water. And then there are interventions that we can do. Once you're in the water, how do I get out? How do I hold onto a rock or a branch, right? And so the idea is to get all the way upstream and put a fence around the river so they don't get in.
Figuring out how to stop kids from falling in the river rather than continually trying to just pull them out downstream. That's kind of our goal with this upstream approach to teaching these skills. And so another question people have asked is, what are the credentials needed for the SEL teacher or the person teaching DBT Steps A in a school? Or can parents teach this? And the way we developed the curriculum is we know that the school mental health staff are already really busy and have full schedules. If they're the school psychologists are often doing lots of testing, our school counselors are doing lots of academic coaching, and their schedules are full and they don't have regular classes in the academic calendar or schedule with students. So we actually designed it in a way that school mental health staff could teach the DBT Steps A class, and they don't need to. It could be taught by any general education or special education or school staff person who's motivated to teach these skills to students. The lessons are written with scripts and detailed examples that we're not talking about critical mental health problems and specific difficulties that students might be having. The curriculum is really geared towards how do all students use these skills? Is it relevant to all of our lives? When we were teaching the DBT Steps A curriculum in the live streams to our kids 2 mornings a week for the last couple of months, every time we would do a mindfulness exercise, they knew the next question after we did the exercise was always, okay, how did this game or this exercise we just do, how is it relevant to your lives? And so we would talk about how for them at 13, 12, and 8, these skills that we were practicing were relevant to their lives each day. So it's not just meant for the kids at the higher tiers who are struggling clinically. We wanted these to be skills for everybody, and thus anybody can teach them.
Great point. All right, so go ahead, Jen.
Would it be okay for me to jump in at this point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I wanted to just be attuned to the fact that we've got educators and parents on the line and maybe start answering some of these amazing questions that came in beforehand. So first off, for some of the people who are really at this more at ground zero, weren't on the last call, how do you apply the DBT Steps A training in a school setting? And what are some of the strategies for overcoming barriers to successful implementation?
All right, you want me to?
Go for it.
I'll jump in. So I think that first, I think you have to do some homework and we have to kind of prime the system, right? We call it kind of greasing the rails so that it's a smooth transition onto those rails. Is that I think that there are inherent factors that schools have in their traditional structures that make something like DBT Steps A sometimes difficult to implement. And it's called the traditional schedule, that there's such a strong focus on academic achievement. And so it's more about being able to talk to the educators, the people who have the power to make the decisions to say, hey, look, we know from some of the research that if you're able to implement social emotional learning programs, not even just DBT Steps A, just in general, academic attainment actually goes up. Number of absenteeisms goes down. Number of discipline problems go down. So it actually is a helpful thing to have social emotional learning in your school. All right. And so where do we put it? So that's always the question that we get, right? And so because we're talking about emotion regulation, taking care of yourself, being able to not give into your emotions, we often find ourselves closely aligned with like some of the health teachers, because they're teaching about risky sex, they're teaching about drug and alcohol prevention, they're teaching about suicide prevention, right? So it slides in there pretty easily, although it doesn't have to. We've got people all over the country. Some are teaching it in history, some are teaching it in social studies. So where you can see stories or history of people who emotionally struggled and that changed the course of history, or that changed the course of a book, or that changed the course of something else, I think is a place where you can bring that in. One of the major pieces though, when we do these trainings, is we'll have champions who are teachers who want this, and the principal or the superintendent says, we don't have time for it. And I think that's a big issue. So we try to ask teams to come together that have support, such as social workers, school psychologists, teachers that would actually be teaching it, and then the administrators to come on board so that there's more of a team approach.
Yeah, I think getting champions on who's going to teach it, and also administrative support, whether that's administrative support for one teacher to try it out in their class by themselves, or administrative support to say, you know what, we're putting this in all classes. That's what you can do both. And so it's about getting some buy-in first and foremost from the person who's going to teach it.
Great. So, and then if you're thinking about implementing DBT steps, imagine that you've conquered the fact that you've got universal implementation happening at some grade level within a school. How do you think about using DBT Steps A across the MTSS PDIS continuum? For those of you on the call who aren't familiar with that, that's multiple tiers of support, or positive behavioral intervention strategies. Woo!
Yep. All those acronyms that we have in school psychology. And so I think it works really well. So if you have an MTSS system, we have written and developed the curriculum to be designed for universal, because we think everybody during adolescence goes through some type of drama, right? Some type of emotional experience, all right? And if you have not, as an individual listening to this, let us know, because we want that magic, whatever it was that you had, right? And so at the tier 2 level, which often I'm working more with social workers and school psychologists, we suggest that people slow down. We're much more interested in the kids learning some of the skills than trying to rush through the curriculum and have them learn half of that, right? And so we'd rather you do 50% of the skills 100% well than 100% of the skills only 50% well. Because the idea is that the curriculum is designed for students to develop their own toolbox of what works for them. And what works for Liz in emotional regulation may not work for me. And so the idea is to what works for me, so when I'm in that spot, I can draw upon it. And when Liz is in that spot, she can draw upon it. And the idea is that that teacher is the coach. And all that teacher's doing is polishing and letting them practice the skills. Because we know that just knowing the skills, knowledge gained does not equal behavior change. We know that through our drug prevention. We know that through emotional dysregulation. So we want people to be practicing those skills. And at that tier 3 level, we slow things down more. We do more projects that are involved with the kids. We ask them for their goals more. And so I think that we try to hit each one of those tiers. And then we also even work with what's called tier 4, which is usually beyond the MTSS system, in that we probably have kids who are getting outpatient therapy, who are getting some outside agency type of mental health services. How do we help them learn the language? Because one of the biggest things that happens when people are getting outpatient or out of school placement services is that the school individuals don't know the language that's being used in the outpatient therapy setting. And so if we can use a language that's similar, and I'm the school psychologist working with kids who need tier 3 services, if I know that language, then I can elicit that kid to produce some of those skills and strategies they learned in their therapy. Anything to add to that?
That's a great explanation of it.
So we do think it fits really well. And then the PBIS piece, Jen, that's there is that PBIS often has goals that the school is hoping to accomplish. They're often goals that are decided by the staff and the teachers that are there. And when you have kids that are really struggling, the goal looks great. You say, well, be respectful. Well, if I'm emotionally dysregulating and the principal says, just be respectful, I'm a kid going like, how do I get there? I get it. I know what this is, but how in the hell am I supposed to get there from here to here, right? Mm-hmm. And so the DBT Steps A skills are the road that gets you to that piece.
Right, so they really fit complementary to each other, where PBIS is kind of structuring the environment as a whole with the school and the staff, and then Steps A comes in trying to give the students the specific skills they can use to meet those school-wide goals, right? Mm-hmm. And so they really balance each other well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So here's a question that's very pertinent. How do you suggest implementing DBT Steps A while on distance learning or in virtual learning? And how do you think, in particular, your videos that you've now created can be used in support of that?
So I think there's two ways that they can be used. I've been talking to several teachers who are moved right into virtual distance learning with their Steps A classes, and they're continuing to do the same level of interaction, teaching, having these kind of Zoom meetings where students can participate in them. So for many, it's been just a smooth transition from, after you get through the first few bumps of figuring out all of the technology and setting up some guidelines about how the students, come on with their cameras or not on with their cameras, being present and what time, that they're still teaching the lessons with the examples, using breakout rooms or the Google Hangout classroom parts of it where they can separate and having these conversations. So many classes I've spoken to and teachers, they are stepping right into just continuing what they were doing in person. And in one of my schools, they're actually getting more participation now online from their students than they were when they were face-to-face. So that's worked really well. We've had some classes just kind of join in when we were doing the YouTube lives. We've had full classes join in and watch us teach that way and then have discussions about it afterwards. We've had teachers watching our videos as ways of prepping for their own examples. So using it as a learning tool for the teachers to teach their pieces, and then families and kids going and watching snippets from each of the lessons. So I think they can pull in our lessons. There's a million YouTube videos out there about the different DBT lesson skills in general. Some are more clinically focused, some are more universal. Being able to look at those and pull them in work pretty seamlessly once you understand the technology and you're able to kind of engage the students right now, especially with lots of examples around COVID-19, around the social justice climate that we're experiencing now. and kind of pulling all those pieces together, especially getting ready for summer, and then how we're going to come back in the fall and what that might look like.
So there was a question about whether or not, particularly in the preparation for potential continued distance learning in the fall, whether or not you all are planning to do any more training of people this summer. And so I just thought I'd ask that. There's a training in the question in the Q&A box about that.
Yes, we are. We're actually tomorrow starting our first live virtual training for a set of schools that we'll be doing and seeing how that goes. And because we've been getting lots of people asking this question and interested in us doing more virtual distance learning training later this summer, after we get through these first 3 days, we're looking into how to launch that. So if anybody is interested in getting training, they can subscribe to our mailing list on our website, which is dbtinschools.com, or also just send us an email if you're interested in hosting or bringing training to your specific school for all of your staff. Those are all opportunities that are available now that we've figured out how to manage all of the video, audio visual abilities and training online. That's, you know, part of our learning curve, and fortunate we learned all that from doing all these live streams.
Right. So there was a question in here about how you get certified to be a teacher of DBT steps. And so I'm assuming that if you go through that 3-day training that you're certified, or what's your process for that?
So you get a certificate of attendance. Nobody has to be certified to teach DBT Steps A. We've heard from a handful of teachers who pick up the manual because the lessons are written in such a detailed way that they're able to go and teach them without any training at all. And then we hear from people that they've done that and then they come to one of our trainings and it makes even more sense and they're able to be even more effective. There's not a certification process for being able to teach the curriculum. We wanted to decrease the barriers needed to get these skills into schools and for students.
Right. I might segue. Do you guys want to speak a little bit more to anything on the schools and DBT use in schools, or should I transition to some of the questions for our parent audience?
The only thing I would add, and I don't know if this is a parent question or not, about teaching some of these skills to younger kids. And so I'm working right now on the curriculum for our K through 2 kiddos and our 3 through 5. And I've separated those two out just because of the developmental needs that are there, right? Especially for our kindergartners. Teaching at that level is going to be a much different pace, a much different way to teach. It's going to be much more project-based type learning as well. And so, yes, I think we can help our kids get some of these emotional regulation skills. It'll look different and feel different for them than it would be our high school. And at the same time, I'm such a big advocate for making sure that we start working on our emotional language and talking about our emotions at 4, 5, and 6 years old. Let's start building that vocabulary like we do with other kiddos as well. And so we're trying to do that. So I see real quickly, when will that be available? That's a good question. I thought I'd be almost done with it by now. And one of my lunchroom skills, my janitorial skills, teaching middle school, didn't see that one coming. So not sure we're working on that though. Thank you.
And Jen, before we transition to more thinking about parents, I just want to answer this one question about how do you implement the DBT Steps A curriculum in your therapy sessions? I think it's really important that we highlight that there is a difference between DBT Steps A and DBT for children, the clinical application. When we designed DBT Steps A, we really pulled it out of a clinical application to be used in a universal tier 2, tier 3 setting. Clinicians can use the manual, they do use the manual, they use the curriculum to teach for other examples, but we wanted to make sure that what was developed by Marsha Linehan as a clinical treatment is we are not doing therapy in the schools with the DBT Steps A curriculum. There are programs that have school-based mental health programs that do provide clinical school-based DBT treatment in schools, and that is different from DBT Steps A. We are teaching the skills as a part of building mental wellness and resilience.
Yeah, and that was purposeful because we wanted every kid to be able to have this. We just think that everyone could use some skills in their emotional difficulties that they're going to have growing up. And so we want everybody to have it.
Right. So as a point of clarification, so if you were talking about DBT in the context of therapy, many of those same skills would be taught. Yeah. It's just that you would do it in a much more intensive way. You'd have parent coaching, you'd have, you know,
Therapy.
individual therapy, all sorts of different elements that make the DBT counseling much more intensive than this.
Right.
Exactly.
And our idea was to design a class that could be taught not by a mental health professional, but by a general education teacher. And that's why it's written in layperson language the best that we could. And so that it could be a class that actually gets a grade, just like a Spanish class or algebra or language arts. And so we wanted kids to be able to get a grade that helps their GPA on how well they get to improve themselves, right? How well they're practicing the skills, not the outcome of it, just the practice part.
So here's a question that's sort of halfway between relevant to educators and parents. So how do you facilitate a dialogue with students about the importance of learning these skills? And I realize that you can plop this curriculum into some other class context, and that's a great way to kind of get kids to learn it. But, you know, short of that, like we're at a period right now where, you know, we're really trying to give kids tools, coping tools and strategies right now. You know, so how do you motivate them to kind of get out of the, let's just say video game slash, you know, just disengagement that's happening with our kids today? How do you motivate them to get motivated to learn a little bit about these coping strategies?
I think the key is that we've found is starting early in the curriculum in the first few weeks that when we're talking about rationale and goal setting, we're really getting our students to see how this is relevant to their lives and what are their goals. Like, what are their whys and what are the things that they want to accomplish? And then weaving in how these skills are relevant to them meeting some of their own personal goals, whether it's to be a gamer or to be more effective at school, to have more friends, to get their parents off their back. We're trying to kind of focus all of it on how are these skills relevant to you and how are they relevant to everybody on the football field, on the basketball court, at the debate match. All those pieces, we're pulling it in and how it's relevant to each of the students and why these skills are going to be useful to them. And that's part of where we're starting it. And the other part is having schools really start talking about how they want to shift the culture of the school to be more supportive, non-judgmental, and that school is not about only academics. And we care about more than just your academic results, but how you succeed as a whole person.
I think it's a tough shift, Jen, especially now with online school, because now our kids are in front of a screen from 9 in the morning until 3 o'clock, right? And then they're in these teams or in these chat groups that they're talking about school, and they also talk about other things. So they've learned how to get their peer support from the screens, and we're going like, no, we don't want to be doing that, right? Wait a minute, peer support, right? And so how do we do that while at the same time saying, no, you can't go over to somebody else's house, right? And so we've had to be very strategic in trying to say, okay, let's do social distance bike rides with somebody. Let's go for a family walk. And so in our kids, we've been able to point out to them that they've been very moody. When we ask them to get off of a video game, they're pretty moody at that point. And we're like, let's point this out, right? It's not that we want to get rid of all those video games. We don't. What we want to do is say, hey, there's a time and a place for that, and there needs to be a balance. So now let's go outside. Let's do something different. And they invariably, within the first 10 minutes of being outside, they feel better about just doing something that's away from that screen. And so we don't take it completely away. We just say there's a time and a place. And right now it's sunny out, it's Seattle, and it's not raining. We're going to go outside, right? And so we try to balance it that way. And then we give them compliments for coming out, appreciating the help that they're doing. And so I think it has to be almost be structured, that you have plans away from it, which was really different because it used to be structured that we had time for the screens. Now we have to have structured time away from the screens.
Can you speak a little bit to, I have a couple of questions here about when will DBT skills be required for schools and also in prison systems, which I think these are some fantastic ideas, but can you speak a little bit to kind of where we're at as a state in terms of thinking about these issues of social and emotional learning and their importance relative to academic learning?
Well, I'm trying to whisper really loudly in a colleague's ear over at social work who's got some really good advocacy skills to get these into schools, and she's been helping me with that as well. So I'm talking about Dr. Jen Stuber, right? And so we know that these are going to be really important, right? And it's not only just for self-harming and suicidal behavior, it's for all those things. We want kids to stay in school. So making required classes, though, is has some barriers to it, right? And it has systematic barriers to it. And so even if it sounds great, How do we go about doing that? And then we have to address some of the needs of the other side, saying, hey, you want me to make sure my kids are passing the state standards, and yet you're telling me I have to teach this class. And so how do we work together as a group to help students obtain their educational attainment while also learning some of these what we call lifelong skills? And so that's
I was also saying, like, it's an advocacy place. There are some schools out there across the country that have a high focus and mission around social emotional wellness and have built social emotional curriculums into their programs. I think there are a lot of schools who also simultaneously are still very academic focused with sprinkling in some social emotional learning, 3 or 4 classes a year here and there, and they're still trying to figure out the transition. I think it's got to be a collaborative approach from statewide standards to parent advocacy and teacher advocacy within administrations. And sometimes you have to go to the district level depending on what region you're in, or by school level. So I think that's the problem across the country, is that there's so many different school setups. Like in New York, every town is its own district, versus you have here in Seattle, the entire city is one district with 70,000 students. And so there's different approaches to each school and implementation.
I think you have to find champions. You have first find champions at the grassroots. Maybe that's probably us at this point, right? Find champions in the school who want to do this, and will find a way to get past some of those barriers in their own school. A champion that maybe is at the district level that says, we need this not only in school 27, but we need it for 67, 87, and actually all of our other schools. And then champions at that state level who are House of Representatives or senators, right? Because they are the ones that have some of this say and know how to advocate for laws and for policies that do that. And we're fortunate in Washington State, we've got several that are really on board with trying to do social emotional learning and help with suicide prevention.
Yeah, and I'll just say one more quick thing before we go to the next question is, and I think right now, in this moment, schools and families are getting primed for wanting social emotional learning come in the fall. Whether we go back in person in a hybrid model, continued distance learning, we're all experiencing a collective trauma right now. And there is going to be a high level of anxiety and emotion dysregulation coming back into schools in the fall, no matter what that looks like.
Right.
So we're at a moment in time where schools are more primed to be thinking about it, and then having advocates within their communities of speaking about that and pushing to have some kind of social emotional learning curriculum built in starting on day 1 in the fall is going to be really important.
Yep, totally agree. I also want to say too that, and one of the questions that in the Q&A box there is that, is it culturally sensitive? Yes and no. Here's why. We wrote a book we started 16 years ago now, or 15 years ago, right? And we tried to write it from as much of a cultural lens as we could have. And it's for the two of us, right? So we have middle school examples and high school examples, right? We kind of make the cutoff roughly at middle school. It can be taught down to 4th graders and 5th graders with some kind of adaptations, right? Mm-hmm. What we need though is that from our lens, we don't know what it's like to be in inner city LA, inner city New York, inner city DC, right? We need those champions who are in the schools to take in the lessons and say, here's what words would work best for my kids. Here's how I need to teacherize it so it's now more comprehensible. It's more attainable for my students. It'll have better traction. So when we do our trainings, we advocate that you teacherize it, put it into what will work for your students. And so we want people who have a better cultural sensitivity lens than maybe we do for their group.
In the application, the skills I think are neutral.
Correct.
And it's about application, because what examples work for our kids in Staten Island or DC are very different examples for our kids in rural Wisconsin and Arizona.
Right.
And that's where the teachers become such a key component of the application piece with their students.
Right.
So how about we transition to a couple of questions that came in from parents. So can parents be trained to implement DBT Steps A? And is there a parenting manual? And I know you all have been doing these incredible sessions, 3 times a week. God love you. But how would you answer that question?
So is there a specific published parenting manual for DBT Steps A? The answer to that is no. We're in the process of, we're writing a parenting book that incorporates all of the DBT Steps A skills into it. Will that be out within the next year? Likely not, as we're trying to do all of these pieces. But here's what I think. For parents, it's why we started the Parenting Through COVID-19 live streams, where we're talking about the skills. I think a parent, just like a teacher, can pick up the DBT Steps A manual, read the lessons, use the handouts, and have conversations with their families about them. I also think you can watch our parenting live streams, where we are talking 3 mornings a week about how to use these skills in our everyday lives. And going through a lot of our previous ones in April and May, we were teaching skills every morning and going through them. Now we're talking about a lot of applications. So there's opportunities as a parent to learn the skills and apply them.
Mm-hmm. I would also just add, as a parent that the videos that you've done with your kids, it's been a challenge to get my kids to watch those videos. However, just me watching them has been really, really beneficial to me in terms of helping parent them, because I have a much better sense about what's going on. And I'm much more emotionally regulated myself, having learned and trying to practice some of the skills. So those videos that are up there are really intended for and useful for both parents and for kids.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna add too that, you know, the DBT Steps A curriculum is kind of designed for that 6th grade level and above, and we've got an 8-year-old, right, 2nd grade, and so having to adapt to the skills and my language for her, right? So we've had to kind of to do that. So, and it's not always seamless either, just letting you know. So but it is real interactions with kids, and so they give us questions like, I didn't think about that one coming.
And I'll say, and just like us teaching those live streams is a very different experience than somebody who's doing a distance learning class.
Sure.
Because people were watching us teach, and we would try to interact with the audience, but it's very hard through a chat box and all of that. So that was not the equivalent of what it would look like to do distance learning. It was more people, you're being able to watch us teach something live.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to comment that you both are brilliant teachers. Like, it was really, really fun to watch. So for anybody, I think it would be very, very useful to definitely use those videos as a resource. So I just also want to be attuned to the fact that like 2/3 of our audience wasn't on the first Q&A. And so I think what might be helpful at this point is to just provide folks with a bit of an overview of what you're doing in terms of DBT Steps A and the framework that you all have for it, because I think sometimes people are really afraid of the term DBT. They have no idea what the heck you're talking about. And so I think just helping people understand the very basic level, not professor speak, what is DBT Steps A and why does it matter for every single student?
Don't you shut me down, go ahead.
That means I get to talk, which sometimes you're better at non-professor speak than I am. So DBT Steps A stands for Skills Training and Emotional Problem Solving for Adolescents. It is a 30-lesson curriculum that teaches concrete cognitive behavioral skills, foundational skills for emotional wellness and resilience. We teach skills from mindfulness, which is really teaching how can you be present in the moment and non-judgmentally. How do you get yourself to focus and put your attention where you need it to be? I know for our kids, that is one of the foundational skills we've had them really practicing and learning, not just in these last couple months, but in general, of how do you put your attention where you need it to be when it's supposed to be somewhere? And I think those are sets of foundational skills that are very different from when we talk about or hear mindfulness. I've worked in a lot of schools and a lot of people, they're like, oh, you're going to teach us mindfulness, so now you're just going to do this. Right? Like that's what they think mindfulness is, where mindfulness really is about putting your attention here in this moment, and you may not always be relaxed or calm from doing it. And also kind of being aware of your internal kind of temperature status on how your emotions are and being more in touch with yourself. So that's part of the skills that we teach. We teach behavior regulation skills. How do you manage impulsive urges? We teach emotion regulation skills, and how do you identify and label what your emotion is and why you have it. And then once you do that, what are some effective strategies you can use to either sit with and experience an emotion or change it if you want to. And then the last set of skills we teach are interpersonal relationship skills about how to build and maintain relationships, how to ask for things more effectively when you want them, how to say no to things more effectively, how to maintain your self-respect during it. And all of those skills stack together over time and with use to help you manage your emotions, react more effectively, and be more successful in your day-to-day managing of life. Also, I can give an example of how we pulled this all together in our Steps A class with our kids, that the culmination of them using all these skills and doing all their homework and practice was they effectively did all their research and asked us for a dog on it. And they worked on that over multiple classes of putting that together, so that in the last class they effectively asked us for one, and we decided to change our entire lives around even more than we already have and to get them a dog. Another quick example I'll give about where these skills come in is kind of in everyday life around mindfulness. Like when I think about our daughter and our kids going to their piano recitals, you know, part of their practice for piano recitals is getting recital ready. They're playing the piano and knowing that anything can happen during the moment. You know, your music could fall, somebody could ring the doorbell, you could hit the wrong key. How do you keep going, right? Their mindfulness skills are all about helping them focus that no matter what happens around them, they're keeping their attention where it needs to be, and they're going to keep going without getting emotionally dysregulated to a place where they get interrupted. So those are where the skills really come in to teach all of that.
Great. So one place that I think we are different than SOS again, teen mental health first aid ruler is that during that time when your kiddo or your student has emotional dysregulation, they are now way up in their emotional thermometer. There are skills that have names to them that we can help them not make it worse. And that's different than a lot of the other curriculums, because they tend to say, okay, you learn this and learn this during times when the emotions are not strong, right? When they're not driving the bus. When they're driving the bus, that's when we make really poor decisions, usually with relationships, with self-medicating and so forth. What are those skills now in that area, right? And we call those the distress tolerance skills. That's what I think makes it really unique and different. And we can call those out by name. And if everybody recognizes the name, they'll know how to help that person as well. That means the principal, the school psychologist, the teachers, and so forth.
And that's what we're ultimately looking for, is culture shift and language shift in schools, to where we're all using the same language around skillful behavior.
Mm-hmm. So I know we have about 5 minutes left. I wanted to pay a little bit of a tribute to your 3 kids who have been willing to do this. So make sure you tell them from me and our audience that they're amazing. And I was curious as to, there were specific skills, and I know you just mentioned a lot of different types of skills that are taught in this curriculum, that you find your 3 children gravitating more to others. Like, for example, my daughter is all about the ice cube and all about doing something to get cooler when she's hot, which she's very hot these days. So I'm just curious, with your 3 kids and the application of these skills, how that's gone, and what are some of the skills that they've gravitated towards?
Yeah, great question. Matter of fact, the last Thursday, I asked them for the 3 favorite skills, each one of them, right? And so we got in mindfulness, being in one moment, which was really important for them. Just them having to realize that they just have to slow down and not worry about what's going to come up and not worry what just happened. So being one mindful. Opposite action was important for Grace and Jackson at that point, right? And so the idea of just noticing the urge that they want to do something and having their wise mind say, no, that's not a good idea, right? Doing the opposite of that urge, because they went and they checked the facts and they didn't fit the situation. Mm-hmm. And then I think wave skill.
The wave skill, sitting with their emotions and knowing that it's okay to sit with their emotions has been a big one for all of them.
Yeah, I think so, right? And so that we often want to, as parents, we want to soothe our child for crying or want to soothe them for their anger or whatever else. And sometimes that emotion actually does fit the situation. They have a right to be upset, a right to be sad, right? And just let them have it. Be there to be, to kind of support them. And that's the right emotion to have, right? What you don't want them to do is throw something through the window or punch somebody or whatever else. And so that's where the distress tolerance skills would come in, right?
And those the skills are really, I'll say, I just got an email from a high school teacher yesterday who was telling me that her kids were so grateful that they've learned these skills, that check the facts and radical acceptance, especially during this time of COVID, and quarantine has been the most useful skills for them to really accept the reality of where our country is right now, as giving them the ability to then problem solve effectively to get their needs met. Has been another one.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to give you all a chance, as we're running a little bit low on time, but just to answer this one last question here before we sign us off here. What have you learned during this period of implementing these parenting sessions and these sessions with your kids? Like, what are you taking away from this, besides the fact that you're now incredible users of technology?
So I'll start, right? And so last Thursday's class was humbling for me because we've been teaching these lessons, and every lesson started off with an overview, and I always place the skill in the right module, right? And so I was thinking that my kiddos would have that, right? And they didn't. And I was like, oh, how come you're on the wrong side of or the different side of the dialectic here? And so realizing that it's not as important for where they place the skill, it's important for where they apply the skill, right? And me being the teacher and the academic, wanting it to be in that perfect spot was actually not as important as them knowing what skill to use in what situation, regardless if it was distress tolerance or emotional regulation or interpersonal effectiveness, right? So that was good. And they knew a lot of skills. I was humbled by how many skills they actually retained and knew.
Mm-hmm.
Yourself?
Yeah, for me, I'll say I'll go to the parenting classes. Is what I've really learned is how many parents are struggling and thinking that they're not doing an effective enough job, and how much from a parenting perspective, they don't have the language and the specific skills to use on a universal level with their kids. It's been really difficult for them. So being able to have conversations with parents about what we're struggling with and what skills we're using as two child and adolescent psychologists, to be able to talk to other parents who are having those same struggles has been really helpful. And I've learned a lot from that, of just how to make sure that everybody's getting more of these skills on a universal level. It's been a really big piece.
Well, I'm grateful to you, and I know a lot of people are. You guys are awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before I see there's some other questions that a couple people have just asked about. How do we get training? How can we do more? Just go to our website and you can send us an email from there at dbtinschools.com if you have more questions for us beyond this, especially around training and other ways of implementation. We're happy to answer those questions for you. Thank you all.
Yeah, and we got a lot of great questions. The link to the evaluation of this Q&A session is in your chat, and we hope that everybody will take the time to do that now. That's the way we actually receive federal funds to support all the programming that we've been doing. I might just ask this one last question while people are doing the evaluations, because I saw it pop up near the end, but any suggestions about any specific ways, Jim and Liz, to kind of incorporate these skills into something that purposefully is helping children and young adults, whether it's in school or at home, cope with the restrictions and the loss of their different kinds of events and social connections that they may be experiencing as a result of COVID?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really hard, Eric, right now, and we've had to work with our kids, and we've talked a lot about this on the parenting live stream too, about the radical acceptance piece. Mm-hmm. Life really is different, and I think even a lot of adults are having a hard time. They want to go back to how it was, and I don't think we're going back to how it was. I don't think how it was is going to be available to us, right? And so I think the sooner that we can accept that and say, okay, this is going to be different, rather than trying to go back to something that we can't have, because we would call that suffering. We're trying to pour gas on our emotional fire. Helping our kids understand that it's going to be different. It's not going to, we're going to take some time to have to figure some of these things out, and that our social engagements and the amount of parties that we went to and the number of kids that we had at birthday parties is going to be different. And they're not going to like it at first, just like we didn't, right? And that's how it is. So we want to help them kind of get back to staying in their wise mind, making a choice that they know is actually going to be safe for them, that aligns with their goals of what they're trying to do, and also them being able to help satisfy that support need or happiness need or whatever.
And I think I would add on to that after, once you radically accept that, we can move into action. Yeah. And I think the key thing for families that we keep talking about, and we're doing a lot here around, is about accumulating positives every day, doing some kind of joyful experience every day, and building mastery. Every night at dinner, one thing we do as a family is we go around the table and we say, what are 2 things that you're grateful for today? We're highlighting what are 2 things that brought you joy today as a way of making sure we're putting our attention to joyful, positive experiences. And what's one thing that you built mastery in today? What is one hard thing that you increased your competence or confidence in, even though you might not have enjoyed doing it? And trying to mindfully get them every day to bring some attention to that versus just what they're missing out on or what they didn't do, I think are 2 strategies with the acceptance piece that are really key.
Fantastic. Yeah, at the Smart Center, we've been asked what are going to be some mental health supports that might aid in the reopening of schools, whatever form that might take in the fall when kids are coming back and maybe very reluctant to kind of get back into that space after all this uncertainty, and maybe some of those specific tips and those specific strategies from your series and from your book might be the things for folks to zero in on. The gratitude, the wise mind kind of activities around radical acceptance might be some good examples.
And then being kind to yourself, right? Everybody's kind of losing their identity a little bit. And so as students, they want to go back into 8th grade or 9th grade, just like it was when they left. And it's a little bit different. So those kids to be graceful to themselves, right? And that's that accumulating power. Do things that you like to do that help you get enjoyment from what you're doing and how you do it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, teachers are going to need a lot of support. Everybody's going to come in at this elevated level of stress and anxiety to whatever capacity they show up back in schools. Teachers are going to try to keep all the kids apart. Don't touch that, don't touch each other, move away from each other. Kids are going to have anxiety. I keep using the example, one kid's going to pick their nose and everybody else is going to jump on top of them. And that's going to keep a higher level of anxiety. So we have to go in prepared as adults to be validating and supportive and coaching while also providing the kids with skills to manage through all of that as well. I think we have a lot of work to do this summer as from an educational perspective.
Well, just one last thank you for so much, all the 16 sessions that you did, these Q&A sessions, Dr. Liz Dexter Mazza and Jim Mazza. Just thank you very much. And thanks also to Jennifer Stuber at Forefront Suicide Prevention for being willing to join with us at the Smart Center and the Northwest MHTTC way back in April when we realized that we needed to join forces to try and get good stuff out there to our teachers and our parents and our kids. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Megan, is there anything else that we need to do, or are we calling it a session?
I think this wraps it up. Thank you all for sharing your time and expertise, and thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everybody.